parables for months. And probably is our last message about the parables. There's something that we saw in the very beginning when we started, first message, that we also saw in last week's message. And last week we looked at the final judgment, and it really isn't a parable. It's Jesus teaching, trying to wrap up the parable teachings of the 10 virgins and the parable of the talents. And in that, as he's wrapping up those two parables, he says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he's going to sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations are going to be gathered before him, and he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And we looked at that last week. And then he says in verse 34, after he separates the sheep on his right and the goats on his left, he says, then the king will say, Matthew 25, verse 34 says, then the king will say to those on his right, come you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food, and I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. And I just thought it was interesting when we're looking at this final teaching that's kind of wrapping up these parables that are the last two parables in Matthew about the parable of the 10 virgins and the talents. He talks about what's going to happen at the final judgment. And this is not a parable. This is what's going to happen. There is going to be a judgment, and he's going to separate sheep from goats. And this is what he's going to say. He's going to say, come you who are blessed. Now, he doesn't say, come so I can bless you. He says, come you who are blessed. And if you look back at the first parable, and you can go back and on the YouTube videos that have been posted, and you can see it. We looked at it in one of the first messages, parable of the sower, chapter 13. The first one we looked at, he says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. In the parable of the sower, he tells them, and he's talking to his disciples, he's telling them, you're really blessed. He had just told them that the reason that he teaches in parables is because of what Isaiah said. That people hear, but they don't get it. They don't understand. They see, but they don't perceive. They just don't comprehend it because their hearts have grown dull. So he's telling them why he's teaching in parables. And the first parable he taught was a parable of the sower. But he tells his disciples, but blessed are you because you get it. You see, you hear, you understand. It's an incredible thing to me that here in this first parable, where there's 4 kinds of soil, his disciples, in the end, in verse 23, he says, as for what's sown on good soil, this is the one who hears and understands. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and another 30. He's telling his disciples, you get it. You see, you understand. And then what he's telling them is, you are blessed. And he's telling them their future. You're going to see fruitfulness. I just think it's incredible. I'm not going to reteach that parable, the parable of the sower, but that was the first one. And then you go full circle, clear to the end, Matthew chapter 25. Here you go full circle, and he's talking about the end times, the judgment. The king is going to say, come you who are blessed. Comes full circle around. Come, you who are blessed, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Their answer is going to be, Lord, when did we see you? They're not chastised or disciplined because they didn't see. They're blessed. In fact, they are the ones who he just said, come you who are blessed. I got to ask the question, are you blessed? Do you find blessing in that? Here's what I'm talking about. You know, back in the day, you know, before all of us had a previous life, right? I loved rock and roll. I still, sorry, but I still like rock and roll. But back in the 70s, I remember being in Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. I was in awe. I was 18, 19 years old, I think. The place was crazy. It was full. It was full there because Doobie Brothers were playing. Chicago was playing. And Ozark Mountain Daredevils were playing. And when those groups lit the place up, it was alive. It wasn't too long living in that whole scene. It wasn't too long until you realize something. The music, when it's over, what then? There's a moment where the music fades. There's a moment when you realize it was just fun for the moment. Life's rough. Do you know what I'm talking about? You can find goodness in just about everything. You can find fun for the moment. But when the music fades, I kind of wonder if that's why. And again, I don't want to sound critical or nasty to people who are really struggling in darkness. I was there. But there's so much drug abuse and alcohol abuse with that whole scene, right? Because I think it's that dynamic. What about when the music fades? There's a lot of questions with me, and Jesus goes through these parables. And we're gonna go through them really quick. But you know, one of the problems with the church today, and guys, it's been there for centuries. It's not just today. You can read in Revelation, the 7 churches. These things are problems. It's just been talked about in different ways. But the church will figure something out and do it. And then it just gets old. It becomes irrelevant. And it's really no different. When the music fades, what else is there? Well, people can get on a bandwagon for this cause or this cause or this cause. You know, back in Prohibition, the church was on a big thing about prohibition. Well, what did it do when that faded? We could pick every big cause. We live in a contemporary world, but the church right now is struggling with the fact that it's all about entertainment. That's my opinion. What happens when the music fades or when it isn't that good? There was a time when, soon after I really gave my life to the Lord, there was a time when I was really pushing hard this thing of nonviolence. I was part of a committee. Vietnam War wasn't over yet. Guys, all these causes. What if 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 it's all about the cause, what about when the music fades or the cause gets, the way of the cause gets hard? Some of these causes, people wonder, why did they go? They started out for a good purpose, peaceful, and now it's violent. What just happened here? I mean, that's happened even with those that had a Christian foundation. I could give examples and it would just sound like I didn't want to get caught up in all of the negative stuff. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. When the king comes, it's going to be like he told his disciples at the beginning. Blessed are, come you who are blessed. And so, blessed are you, he said back in 13:16, who hear, who listen, who got it. And you're going to be fruitful. And then he goes, his whole ministry, he's talking about these parables. And so that was the parable of the sower. The next one, parable of the weeds. Where the weeds and the wheat were planted. Somebody came and I'll just keep talking. Somebody came and planted the weeds. And they ask, should we pull them? He says, no, let them grow together. The kingdom of heaven is supposed to be like that. And yet it seems like we have this continual pressure to pull the weeds. He says, no, let them grow together. When I was a kid growing up, I had to, because I wanted to earn some money. I worked for my brother-in-law who was a lot older than me. And I'd have to go and pull weeds because he grew vegetable. He was a vegetable farmer. And so a lot of times there were times when you couldn't use the equipment. You had to pull things by hand. I hate pulling weeds. The times, the hours that I spent in the sun, in those fields that seemed like the rows were never ending. So I read this and I'm thinking, oh, this is cool. I don't have to pull weeds. The kingdom is supposed to be these people who have so much confidence in the wheat and what God's doing. Pulling weeds, no, we're supposed to wait. And he explains why. I'm not going to go back into all that. But there's that. And then there's the mustard tree. What's the next one we have up there? The parable of the weeds. And remember the mustard seed and the tree? I'm only going to talk for a second about these. But this is the kingdom of heaven's like this. So you have this garden and you have bean plants, you have these little plants, but the mustard seed, it grows into what looks like a tree. And Jesus says the mustard seed, because it grows into a tree, when it really doesn't grow into a tree. Trees live year after year after year. The mustard seed is single generation. It grows and it towers over the other plants in the vegetable garden, the one I hate to pull weeds in. And this mustard tree, it becomes so big that the birds seek out shelter. Even the birds. Parable about the net. Net fishing. I like fishing, but I fish with a rod. I don't net fish. But when you read the stories in the Bible about the net fishing, it was their livelihood. It was their business. So when they fished with a net, and they would cast the net. And what you get is whatever you get. So you get good fish, you get bad fish, you get fish that people aren't going to buy. You get some really nasty fish. Same with the weeds. Jesus' point was, we net fish. We gather them all. Let the God and his angels sort them out later. The church, the kingdom of heaven here on earth is supposed to be like net fishing. There was a parable about the master of the house with the new and the old. Oh wait, did we miss with the leaven? Works through the dough. Um, the hidden treasure, I think, is next. The pearl. Um, the master of the new and the old. Like I said, we're just going to, kind of walk through them pretty quick. I think this is an interesting one. The master of the house brings out treasures. Every house. Have you ever had to help clean up an estate? Guy next door to us, older, died, and his daughter keeps coming. She's been doing this for months. We're going through the stuff and trying to figure out what to do with it. And she's finding things that little treasures that she didn't even know were there. And the master, he says the kingdom of God is like a master of a house who finds the new, but also the old. Guys, we live in a society where we think the old is just irrelevant. There's such treasures in the kingdom that we need to be people, students of the word, looking for the treasures in the old as well as the new. In chapter the next one, the parable of the lost sheep, and Jesus says in Matthew 18, he talks about the lost sheep, and then after that the parable of the unforgiving servant. Do you know the passage, right? It's a passage where he says if somebody wrongs you, you need to go to them, and you need to forgive them, and if that doesn't work, take somebody with you and then take it to the church. The whole point of that whole thing is do whatever you can to restore the relationship. And even when it doesn't work, he says at the very end, treat them like you would a Gentile or unbeliever. You know what we're supposed to do with that? We're supposed to continue to love, agape love, because that's what overcomes. And then he goes right into the teaching of the unforgiving servant. He says, it's supposed to be a never-ending thing, this thing of this life of love and forgiveness. We're never to withhold forgiveness. We're supposed to do whatever it takes to go after that lost sheep and do whatever it takes to see them restored. That's the whole point of it. And then what's the next one there? The two sons. Don't you like this parable? He says, who actually did what they were supposed to do? Who actually did the will of God? Here's a guy who the master of the vineyard says, go work in the vineyard. And the one son says, okay, I'm going to do it. But then he doesn't do it. But the other one says, no, I'm not going to do it. But then he gets up and he goes and does it. And Jesus says, so which one actually did the will of the master? And the people who were listening said, well, of course, the one who actually did it. What we do matters, guys. It's not just what we talk about. It's what we do that matters. So I go through all of these, and I could stop and dwell on any one of them. But when we look at all we do here, all you do you feel blessed? Are you going to be able to resonate with those standing before the great white throne judgment? And God and Jesus says, the King says, come you who are blessed. Are you going to be standing there thinking, oh, I'm blessed? Are you thinking that now? Are you thinking it's just such a blessing to sow seeds, and yet we never seem to see the results? Because the disciples, back with the parable of the sower, he was telling them, you're going to be fruitful. You get it. You're going to be fruitful. But they weren't yet. We plant seeds. It gets old after a while, right? Jesus taught so many things. You give to the hungry. That was his point in the whole sheep and goats thing. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. Who doesn't find that after a while getting old? And asking the question, are we just making the problem worse? Where is Jesus in this? would you be one who say, I'm blessed? I'm blessed. Or would you have to acknowledge, wait a second, I'm not feeling so blessed today. In this in this situation, I'm kind of feeling taken advantage of. In this situation, this life is rough. In this, uh, because I'm not. I don't know how you feel. All I can do is speak for myself. And I'm going to have to tell you something. One of the best things to prepare me for what God had ahead was that He led me into distance running and running marathons. When you run a marathon, at least this was a key thing for me. I made the decision 8 months before the race, or 9, that I was going to finish that race. And so all of my training every day was to reaffirm and confirm my decision, so that when the race happened, you can't anticipate what's going to happen during a marathon. I could tell you so many stories of how this thing happened or that thing happened. My body fell apart in one marathon. But you know what? I finished every one. The reason I think I finished every one was I made the decision ahead of time. I'm going to do this. So I'm just saying, when you do that and you've had really rough marathons, I can't stand here and say, oh, I was feeling blessed when my body fell apart at mile 13 and mile 17 was just it's just so painful. I can't say I was feeling blessed. I can't say I was feeling blessed. I could tell you one race after another. I can't say I was feeling blessed. But you know what? I finished every race. I sometimes wonder, in this thing that Jesus says to his disciples. So I want you to go out there planting seeds. You get it. You understand. Plant the seeds. You're going to be fruitful. And yet every one of the disciples suffered some kind of persecution, and all but one of them were martyred. And yet if you read one after the other in the New Testament, they say, count it a pure joy to suffer for the Lord. It's like, boy, they could have run marathons. You know why they could have run marathons? A whole lot better than me. Because they even found it joyful when it got hard. How do you do that? How do you do that? For those who can hang in there and stand in, there are a lot of social justice warriors that work at good humanitarian efforts, right? And yet we wonder, why is it that they their attitude, their demeanor changes, whether they're Christian or not? You can see it happening. Well, I got to ask the question, well, why? I don't think they're feeling blessed. What would you say? Now, there was a moment in their life when they started, they thought that was a calling, that they found blessing in that. So what happened? You might not agree with me on this. It's okay, you don't have to. But I don't think it's how you feel, but it's about what you see, what you hear, and what you do with it. And so when you look at these parables and you see each one of them, there's a message in there about what you're supposed to do. The parable of the two sons, for example, neither one of them really felt like going to work in the vineyard, but the one went ahead and went. It's not necessarily about how you feel, but it's about, but what did you hear? What did you understand? What did you do with it? And so how do you bring all this together? How do you make sense of it? And what in the world is it that I'm trying to say? Jesus said this. Please don't miss this, because this is actually the heart of what I'm saying. Please don't miss this. Jesus said, I was hungry. You gave me food. I was thirsty. You gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Do you know what he said to the goats? He said, I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked, you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. But to the sheep, he said, I was there. I think one thing that God's really trying to speak to me about these days, live in the blessed of today. You know, and you see, and you hear, you understand. You understand these things. You can read these parables and you can understand, you can get it. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the world today where whether they say they're Christian or not, if they're not blessed, I guess the question I got to ask is it because they missed Jesus in it? Jesus said in Matthew 18, where 2 or 3 come together, and he's talking about resolving conflict. Where 2 or 3 come together or agree in my name, there I am. He says, when people gather together with me, together, I'm going to be there. The blessed are people who understand that Jesus is here. He has something for us to do. Are we celebrating serving Jesus in the moment? Are we celebrating whatever it is that's going on, saying, but I know Jesus is here. This isn't about, and this is why I hope I'm not being misunderstood. This isn't about pouring on negativity. This is about us figuring out how can we do these things celebrating his presence. In the 90s, I worked in construction, had my own company, we built things. And any of my kids, anybody that was around, anybody that worked for me will chuckle a little bit when I start talking about pie and ice cream. Because pie and ice cream, we had a tradition that I started. Always jobs would have the possibility of just really going south. And jobs just didn't go well. And when things were just like you were thinking, they just can't go any worse. I just said, guys, we're going for pie and ice cream. They had no idea the first couple of times I did this, what we were doing, because they're like, is he going to yell at us? Is he going to fire us? Or what is going on here? So we went to a restaurant. I said, get the pie you want, ice cream you want. They did, and they're still kind of, what's going on? It was always fun after the first bunch understood what was going on. It was always fun then to have a newcomer because they were seeing the same thing. Guys, doesn't matter what happens, how challenging it gets, how can we take the difficult moments, the challenging moments, and say, wait a second, but Jesus is here. Let's have a pie and ice cream moment because we're going to trust Jesus. We're blessed. We're here. We might have all these things challenging us. It might be a Saturday night when everything's going bad. How can we change our thinking? We're not talking about creating an entertainment industry type experience in the church. But how can we celebrate Jesus in the moment? With whatever moment's going on, how can we celebrate Jesus in the moment where we today, without no matter what, where we can say, but I am blessed because Jesus is here, but I'm blessed. I understand. I get it. And today, it's a tough day. Today is a great day. Today is somewhere in between, but I'm blessed because Jesus is here. One of the problems in today's world with church and Christianity, I'm sorry, guys, but the people who need Jesus most, they're not seeing Jesus. If they would just see Jesus in us, no matter how challenging the moment. Jesus said when he's lifted up, he draws all men unto himself. Do people see Jesus? Do they see that we are blessed because we have Jesus in the moment? He's really here. He's everything. This isn't about putting a spin on things. That's something totally different. Jesus never puts spins on things. But when Jesus is there, you know what Paul had to say? Paul said, he's my everything. With him, all things are possible. I will have to say that there are moments here at Agora that things are tough. And I know people have seen me kind of walk in with my head hanging because I'm dealing with this thing and this thing and this thing. Guys, we need to live life with our head held high and our shoulders square, enjoying Jesus in the moment, knowing that his blessing is with us. Walking in joy, even in the difficult moments, having pie and ice cream with Jesus. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, I want to thank you for your many blessings. You gave very clear teaching that life in this world, in chapter 24 of Matthew, is always going to be difficult. The forces that are working against us are harsh and playing for keeps, trying to destroy. But we have the power that prevails over that in Jesus. And Lord, that we would just walk in a joy that runs deep. Not the superficial stuff that when the music fades, it's all over. But that joy that comes from within because Jesus is there. The rivers of life flow deep. And so we celebrate you in the moment, every moment. Living life blessed because you are with us. Because we gather together in your name. We gather together in your presence. And your presence is with us. God, that you would just cause us to walk in your power and your joy and celebration. Our broken world needs it. Loved ones around us need it. They need you. We need you. Be mighty and powerful. We worship you, Lord. In your name I pray, amen.